All right, everyone, the Mexican election is looming up here, and it looks like Mexico is probably going to elect a socialist. It's sort of like he's a weird character because he seems to be somewhat nationalistic while also being on the left. I've spoken about this concept in terms of like Europe. Some people think like Le Pen, as a Eurosceptic, wants, a Frexit or something like, oh, she must be far right. But she's actually, if you look at the policies, fiscally and even socially, kind of on the left. It's just a Eurosceptic sort of nationalistic front. Nationalistic movements in many cases are on the left, economically speaking. Then you get globalists on the left and right too, so that's a separate issue. It's sort of like atheism and theism. People mistake that for whether you are or are not spiritual. Totally different arguments. Lopez Obrador, though, which is his name, he mentioned some funny things. Like, number one, he wants to double the minimum wage of Mexico. Now, this will fuck the Mexican economy. It won't work. Socialism does not work. In an economy like Mexico's, it can weather it more than a Venezuela. But here's the thing, the people of Mexico, they're basically like, well, we've been in a slump for years. Everything's messed up. The Mexican government is so corrupt, we can't deal with it. We've got resources, we've got, a somewhat literate workforce. Why aren't we getting ahead? Why are we having to deal with this bullshit? The biggest problem in Mexico, fundamentally, is corruption. Corruption, and that feeds over into cartel violence. Not that it doesn't have an impact on what we do here. The drug war here props up cartels. I'm not surprised that the Mexican people are pissed, and I'm not surprised that they would turn to Mr. Lopez for their solution. I just don't know about the wisdom of expecting him to accomplish much. Now, here's the thing. You could end up with essentially a far-left nationalistic revolution within the state of Mexico. It'd be a little bit like Venezuela. Venezuela's nationalistic. They're not globalistic socialists. They're very nationalistic. Oh, we will defend our borders. Venezuela for Venezuelans, basically Maduro's line. It's just we will redistribute everything. Our government's sovereign. It's a corrupt sovereign government. But he's also said something else, and I thought this was interesting. He also, and I don't know whether this was meant half jokingly, said that if he wins that Mexicans should flood the U.S. border. One thing. There aren't enough opportunities in Mexico or in many other states, and the Mexican government, which is corrupt, has been working with the U.S. to some degree to try to solve the problem. You've got to understand that a large proportion of illegal migrants to the United States, economic migrants, they are not Mexicans. Those that are Mexican, they're not coming from Monterrey. They're coming from the Yucatan, where all the cartels are operating. It's like two different worlds. If you know anything about Mexico at all, you know that northern Mexico, especially northeast Mexico, is nothing like the Yucatan Peninsula. A lot of people that think of Mexico, they're like, oh, that semi-desert area where people walk around with six-shooters and sombreros and stuff. No, Mexico is a large nation geographically. There are many subcultures. The fact that they're Mexican almost is an afterthought when you think of it that way. There's still native nationalist groups that want to split off, like near Belize or the border with El Salvador. So you've got to think of these things. Mexico, though, has problems. Obrador thinks, I guess, well, we'll double the minimum wage. We can crack down on some of this corruption. We need socialism, which I don't know how good that will work, especially with Trump being in office. You've got to understand part of this is probably a lashing out against U.S. policy based on sort of a Mexican nationalism. It's actually very funny that Mexican nationalism would be rising because of that. Now, that's not a bad thing. It's just the economic situation might worsen, but the nationalism's fine. Here's the thing, though. Your quasi-nationalistic Mexican movement there is a reaction to a populist and slightly nativistic, vaguely nationalistic sentiment of the Trump populists, basically. So it'll be interesting to see. On one hand, they might actually be able to get along more, because the Mexican government is used to dealing with things in a certain manner, like through Bush, through Obama, in its corrupt way, basically saying a lot and doing very little seems to be the way in which it works. However, this proves a point that I made some years ago at first with regards to libertarian. It doesn't matter whether it's ANCAP or monarchist, because either group can have or not have this sentiment. there's a growing proportion of libertarians who have been hoodwinked by the sort of Bernie Sanders open border world argument, as the progressives abandoned Hillary Clinton and sort of pretended to be libertarians there, and did end up voting for Gary Johnson because he's not a libertarian at this point. What's happened is that a lot of them have embraced the concept of fully open borders. Now, for the ANCAP, the reason this is a bad idea, you've gotten rid of government. There's no real central government anymore. Things have been privatized. People just organize. It's a utopia. Trust me, it can work this time. The anarchy can work this time. We just have to have capitalism in it, as though we can maintain it. People can come in, and look, there's a precedent. And we've got the potential head of a foreign state, a significant nation. We're not talking about, Sao Tome and Principe, the leader, the Grand Poobah there, has said, well, I want to take my people, put them on boats, and charge the Liberian border. No, we're talking about over 100 million people in Mexico. Obrador is telling his supporters, hey, yeah, you don't have jobs, you don't have any opportunity here, I feel bad for you, I'm going to try to improve things. Go to the U.S. for a while, go charge the border, what are they going to do? So you actually have a precedent for what I said could happen, and it'd be 10 times easier if you had an open borders libertarian United States. In an ANCAP society, those people, they can immediately arm up. There's no representative structure anymore. You can't prevent them from seizing land, from taking up arms, from literally debilitating the stateless society you've created. Now then, or even worse, there'll be millions and millions of squatters in your streets, and eventually some high-minded people say, maybe we need a little bit of a state to administer some basic welfare, because we're tired of people living in squalor all around us. It's violating our NEP, and we can't violate theirs by forcing them back out, because we've got an open border society. We can't expect them to just constantly migrate like gypsies throughout the whole continent. We're going to have to do something about this. In a monarchist society, which is what I prefer, you've got a state, but it's significantly smaller and more constrained than the one we have now. It's like 10% the size of the current government under the best of circumstances. Taxes are like, less than a quarter of what they are on every bracket. Most people wouldn't pay really anything. Now, that's the sort of society I want, because I understand the grand chessboard, mad, you have to keep that up. I understand the concept that there are some things that, medicine in a world with world trade, not good to privatize fully. He'd probably end up killing everyone with an epidemic. The problem is, those people would come in large numbers, spurred on by a foreign state's head of state saying, hey, you'll walk across the border or get on these boats. We're going to use 100 barges here in China, and you're going to go and sail over there. Every single week, we're going to deposit 100,000 more people over there until we basically overwhelm California or something. They could easily take control of multiple states. Those states could then potentially attempt to secede and cause a civil war. And again, because you've got a more limited government, it'd be more difficult, admittedly so, to actually prevent that. So Obrador has actually managed to make my argument for me. Here you have a socialistic foreign head of state, nationalistic too, which is hilarious. Nationalism for me, not for thee, I guess, is his idea. Mexicans get to be nationalistic. The U.S. must keep its borders open, or you're bullies, you're mean or something. But he's basically making the argument for me that I made. Because now you've got a precedent. Here's what I warned libertarians would happen if you continue with a loose, open border situation. People who don't actually want to live in a tolerant, progressive, whatever, free society can then come in at their leisure. What's the monarchist government going to do? You can't keep them non-citizens forever. If an open borders society insinuates that you will also have a very, very expedited, very easy and cheap way to become at least a lawful resident, therefore gaining the right to vote, to own weapons, to take part in civics, at the least on lower levels. Well, if you have 4 or 5 states, the residency requirements, as we see with California at least, no longer involve, hey, you have to be a citizen. Now you can be an illegal immigrant, and you can be in an advisory position within California. Why wouldn't more states follow suit, especially when people whose benefit it would be if that happened are the ones moving in? Now, I'm not just talking about like Mexico. Look, if Mexico opens the floodgates, more Central Americans and South Americans will come as well. The Mexican government was already basically turning a blind eye to it. Now, recently, over the last year, at Trump's urging, they've done more, the Mexican government has, to prevent migrants from coming from other countries, and they've started, repatriating them to the southern border. But it's still, this will be a big problem. I think it's going to become a difficult situation for some time to come, and he probably will win. He's got over 50% of the vote in a 4-man race. So it's pretty clear who the Mexican people are probably going to put into power. And it's going to be a considerable amount of power. It's not going to be, oh, well, I can't govern because I won with 26% of the vote. It's going to be significantly more. He will have a mandate to basically do what he wants until he fucks up, which socialists tend to do. He'll end up in a coup situation. He'll kill off some of his adversaries, and then he'll seize more power, and it'll become more like an oligarchy than it already is. Maybe he'll invite the cartel heads over for a meeting. That's about all. Peace out.